Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to tonight's Fireplace Conversations. My name is Edla Kaumbi, the Executive Director of the Namibia Institute of Corporate Governance, the NICG for short. We have these platforms because we believe governance requires conversations. It's not just for boardrooms and conference rooms, but it requires proper dialogue and honest conversations to unpack the things that we read about in policies. Tonight, we are going somewhere where frameworks rarely go. We are going about discussing the people things that actually happen in the boardroom, things that are not captured in the minutes. But before we go there, we need to thank the person or the organization that makes all of this possible. 91, thank you for sponsoring all the Fireplace episodes. 91 is a leading asset management organization in the country and the continent, I believe. So thank you very much for making this possible. Tonight, I have two guests. Between them, they have sat in more boardrooms than some people have attended board meetings. So Libertha Kapere is not a stranger to the Fireplace Conversation. She's been here before, so we're glad to have you back. Libertha has governance expertise for over 25 years across the legal, governance, and compliance fields. You are currently Group Company Secretary and Head of Legal at Namdeb Holdings, Namdeb Diamond Corporation, and the Namibia Diamond Trading Company. Quite a complex governance environment, if I must say so. Libertha is also a non-executive director on the boards of First Strand Namibia and First National Bank of Namibia. She's the chairperson of the Namibia Evangelical Theological Seminary Board, NETS. She has previously served on the boards of Namibre, the Namib Statistics Agency, Namib Holdings, Comrade, and also vice chairperson of the NICG that she co-founded. So my predecessor boss. What makes your perspective particularly valuable tonight is that you have inhabited every seat. You've been a non-executive director, you're company secretary, and you've been a chairperson, like all of these things. So welcome back to Fireplace, Libertha. Don't switch it off.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. My second guest, bestie from high school, she spent 2 decades doing governance from the inside out. Evelyn Zimba-Naris is an admitted legal practitioner of the High Court of Namibia, holds an MBA from NUST, and brings a rare combination of legal expertise, executive management training, and compliance practice to every governance conversation that she enters. She's currently General Manager Corporate Governance at the Social Security Commission. She chairs the Protector Pension Fund and Protector Preservation Fund and serves as Deputy Chairperson of NIPAM. Before Social Security, she spent 11 years at the Roads Authority as Senior Manager Legal Services and 5 years at the Legal Assistance Center. 20 years of board experience across public, private, and non-government entities. That is not a career spent reading about boardroom dynamics. That's a career where you are inside these dynamics. So Evelyn, welcome. Yes. So the King Codes talk about how the board sets the tone for governance, right? They are the ones who are supposed to model the culture. And when we talk about the outcomes of ethical culture, good performance, legitimacy, and effective control, these outcomes are determined by how the room actually happens. So tonight, we're not talking about structures and charters. We are talking about something that is hard to pinpoint and I think maybe hard to fix as well. You know, it's the human dynamics of things. Okay, so let's look at this because if it's not managed well, you know, governance can look very different. It can look like people are governing from the outside, but you know, be very, very different on the inside. So we want to make sure that, you know, when people meet, they're actually governing and not just meeting for meeting's sake. So let's get into it. Let's talk about reading the room, right? So before a single agenda item is discussed, a boardroom tells you something. The seating, who talks to who is having a meeting before the meeting, all the things. What do you think that reveals? I'm starting with you about the culture of a board.
Okay, thank you, Etla. I think, like you said, as you walk into a board room, you meet different people, different backgrounds, different experiences, different expertise. But the way they sit, the way they talk, it does tell you something. It tells you something about the dynamics in terms of, are they a group, collective? Do they have common understanding, trust, mutual respect? So for example, you can see, and I'm just giving an example generally, if someone comes in, first of all, the respect for time. You know, you have a board pack that would come to you 14 days prior to the meeting. How do you show up at the meeting? Do you show up with a board pack that is closed, sealed, which means you obviously haven't read that pack, right? And everybody around the room can see it, management can see it. When you have conversations, do you participate in discussions with an informed type of understanding or logic, or are you just speaking off the cuff? Because you can see that, oh, that person hasn't clearly read the board pack. So it's really, you have to read the room in terms of what the human person is doing, how they are reacting to the conversations. Are they cutting people off? For example, you also have to have common mutual respect, because you have an individual and collective responsibility. And each one of you, doesn't matter whether it's a 5-board, team, 10 board members, you need to give each other an opportunity to speak. So I think those are the things you actually will pick it up when you walk into the room, whether people are prepared, unprepared, and as the conversations commence, have people actually caucused or not? That could also come up. But let me not also just take up all the answer. Let me give an opportunity to Libertha. I think she might have also, seen other things in the boardroom.
Sure. And I mean, you've done this in our trainings at NICG as well. Let's talk about it.
Maybe what I can add is that clearly outside of the boardroom, even before the meeting starts, just by observing how directors engage with one another, you can see where the dominance of power sits. You can see who's the silent lone voice in the room by just observing who's standing on their own, who's management engaging, who's the dominant personality, who's the loud voice. So as COSEC and even as director, when you observe before the meeting starts, you can clearly see where the relationships are, who management is sometimes aligned with, where pre-discussions are happening, and where there are relationships of trust, because people who trust each other normally flock together as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask you that directly, because you've been COSEC and you're also non-executive director. What does it look like for you, depending on which hat you're wearing or which lens you have? Is there a difference at all?
I think as a company secretary, I consider myself to be an enabler of governance. And when I'm sitting on the other side of the coin, if I can call it that, as a director, I'm directly taking the decisions. So I'm not enabling governance. I am fully participating in the governance by taking decisions. And I actually want to quote one of our award-winning writers in Namibia, Estelle Shipuka, when she says that, the boardroom is the epicenter of power. It's where decisions are made that influences people's lives, and it builds legacies. And it's important for us as directors, when we get into that space, to own it fully. And as Evelyn said, not to come there unprepared. We, as a director, you need to come to that meeting knowing that you're going to take decisions that not only influence people's lives, but also have an impact on the country as a whole and globally.
I was wondering though, whether, when you read the room, like as in just as you enter and you feel it, have you experienced where what you're picking up is how it plays out in the meeting? Or, is it something that, is it just an intangible thing, where it looks like people are focusing, or it looks like people are upset, or, is it something just for interest sake? I'm wondering.
Yeah, I think ultimately it will come out in the meeting. I think, as Libertha said, if people have caucused, obviously if there is something that is on their agenda, you see it at the end when the decision finally has to be taken. That you might have a split decision, or you might have the majority going. But what usually happens when people have caucus, sometimes it'll be just like, oh, I concur with Libertha, and I keep quiet. Because maybe Libertha is the one who has, prior to the meeting lobbied me. So I'll just say, no, I concur with her. Then I keep quiet. So what I think needs to happen in that situation is basically the chairperson has to be very strong. And the chairperson would be the one that would actually have to manage those dynamics. Because somebody who might be not really part and parcel of the lobbying might feel isolated, number one, but at the same time, you feel just, I'm not going to say anything because I can see something is going on around here and I wasn't part of it. So the chairperson would then be the one, I think, on the protector where I sit, the dynamics, I'm the only female. It's we are 5, but what usually happens is that when I'm chairing that session, I'm the last to speak. So you give everybody else an opportunity because as a chair, in most instances, you would actually have a casting vote, right? But that casting vote, you should also guard cautiously. First, listen to everybody, give everybody an opportunity to speak. And if there is a dissent, engage with respect so that that person doesn't feel isolated, that, it's me against the rest of them. So you will pick it up in the decisions that are made. You might pick it up in after the meeting, somebody leaves earlier because they're upset. So, we are humans. So you play it out as per what is happening. But I think the person that really needs to monitor, obviously the chairperson, and I think the role of the company secretary is also very important. Yeah. The company secretary being the enabler of governance, I think at that platform should actually be very close then to the chair to give that guidance as well, to say, well, I think let's let the other person engage as well. Yeah.
I think maybe before you come in, Libertha, I want to talk about ethical culture because, even as you talking about, some people are angry or some people already caucused, it's flagging something in my soul about, integrity and ethics and so on, especially if we're talking about what governance actually is. It's about these outcomes of, good performance for an organization to make sure that the organization has legitimacy. But the ethical culture has to be set from the top, right? And so, and it's keeping the main thing, meaning the purpose of why we are there, of why we are on the board in the first place. So what does that look like? What would a healthy board look like in that case? And how is that ethical culture ingrained or, weaved into these meetings?
Yes, Edla, and although a board is a group of people working together for a common purpose, one needs to take into account that it's individuals and the way that we are socialized, our personalities differ. And I had an interesting discussion with a colleague the other day, and we were talking about ethical decision making. And I gave an example of where ethics is not always about a wrong and a right decision. Sometimes you have to decide between two rights or between two wrongs. And ethics is really a personal thing. It's an individual thing. You can't make it about the group. And as a director, the one thing that is of utmost importance is making sure that whatever decisions you make is in the interest of the company. And that is where ethics comes to play because there's influence from all over. There's political influence. There's influence from people from family members. There's influence from management, from fellow directors. And you have to balance all these interests as a director and make sure that the outcomes of the discussions you have are ethical. And one example that I normally give in board trainings is at the end of meetings, what happens to our decision making? Is it confidential or do we go out there and publicize it? Sometimes while we're in meetings, people already know what's happening in the meeting. That means somehow there's no ethical culture there. And I know that we talk a lot about the corporate boards, the NGOs, the state-owned enterprises, but I would say that ethics is shaped in schools, ethics is shaped in the homes, and those are mini boards. Decision-making happens there. So we need to make sure that the way we take decisions outside of the boardroom adds value in terms of an ethical culture.
Do you want to add to that, Eva?
Yeah, no, I think I 100% agree. It's really about the individual. But from a corporate perspective, I think that when you decide to be a board member, there are common law responsibilities and duties, but then you also join an entity that would have its own values. And you as a board member need to live those values. Because as you sit there and take decisions, management is coming and making presentations to you. They see how you interrogate their submissions and how you reason around those submissions and the ultimate decisions that you take. Whether it's two rights, two wrongs, they look at that and they carry through with it. So I think it's really something that I would also say that as company secretaries, governance practitioners, let's make sure that we add that also in the board induction.
Yeah.
So that we get a common understanding with the board members that you work with to interrogate that issue of ethics. Yeah, but I agree totally with Libertha's. Yeah.
No, and I think I'd like to emphasize that it's really good because we have different lenses, different frameworks and backgrounds. It's important that we then agree on what do we consider as the ethical culture here, what are our values. And I think just as an ethics practitioner, there is a framework for what makes, especially just the sunshine test that, this decision that I'm making, will I be able to stand by it if it, comes into the sunshine or on the front page? Okay, so let's talk about independence. In theory, independence in theory and independence in practice are two different things. What pressures exist inside a boardroom that makes it difficult? You were talking about this now, influence and so on. That makes it difficult to have genuine independence. Even for someone who has, every intention to do so, especially because we are a small country, small economy. So what does independence really look like? Maybe let me start with you, Eva.
Yeah. I think independence really, it's about, you come into a boardroom with many hats. You're a member of the community, the society. Mm-hmm. So obviously you come with certain perspectives as a board member. So when you walk into that room, the question really is that the decisions I'm making, are they in the best interest of the entity that I represent? That's number one. Number two, my self-interest. Can I also put those aside? Because at times, I think as board members, people forget all those other hats that they carry with. If you are on a board of a state-owned enterprise, there will be political pressure because the shareholder ultimately also has a stake in that entity. Depending on the entity you work with or you are serving on, there might be societal pressure. There's environmental issues that we need to look at now, sustainability. So the pressures are many, like Libertha said, but it's really the issue of how do you balance all of this, but how do you maintain that you're here in this boardroom representing the mandate of an entity and what is the best interest of this entity. So it's difficult, but I think you basically need to just always jab yourself and ask yourself collectively, individually, what am I here for? And at the same time, when decisions are being made, you might find that the pressures come, but you need to be courageous enough to actually stand firm with a position, if you have a position that might be contrary to others or contrary to another stakeholder that you represent. So I've seen it play out practically in boardrooms where you have, for example, maybe tripartite representation. You come in and you say, I've got a union hat on. But when you sit in that boardroom, you don't have the union hat anymore. Yep. You then have the hat of that entity. Yes. And you need to look at what is on the agenda and definitely, debate whatever issue it is in the best interest of the entity that you represent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something.
Evelyn, to add to that, I think independence is an issue of self-introspection. And Namibia is small. Mm-hmm. In Windhoek, for instance, we've got relationships, family, friends. And here, Eva and I are sitting on this conversation being longtime friends. And one needs to self-actualize. And when you take decisions, make a conscious choice in terms of, does this decision impact myself or people that are close to me? And how do I balance those people's interest vis-a-vis the interest of the business? And it's quite important to also make sure that as much as we wear different hats, it's important to declare those. Mm. If a decision is being made about an entity where I have shares, the other directors should know that I have shares in that company, and I should declare it. And I should make sure that I recuse myself. And independence also comes through in how long I've served on a board. If I've served on a board for over 20 years, I tend to think like the management of that business. I tend to know the business inside out. And then my independence is fettered. That's why we have board rotations. That's why external auditors do partner rotations to make sure that they are independent and that they avoid the issue of groupthink and rubber stamping. Because with independence that is fettered, rubber stamping comes in, because I already know what management is coming with, because I know the business and I don't even need to read anything. Yeah.
I mean, you both are talking about how it's a self thing, how I need to introspect, and so it's an integrity thing. So, but how do you manage that when, I mean, you are speaking as people of integrity, and so it's easy for you to say that. But what if everyone else isn't thinking like that? Or how do we manage where that isn't the case with everyone? Or how is that handled in a boardroom?
That's where the relationship between the chair and the COSAC is so important. And the chairperson is the first line of defense when it comes to these things. Because based on discussions, based on input, you would read between the lines whether there is independence or not. And then the company secretary is the second line of defense. It's with all the information in terms of conflicts that's been declared, previous discussions that were had about this matter. So these two individuals working together can make sure that issues related to integrity, issues related to ethics, independence are addressed immediately. Delaying discussions on independence and integrity really causes dysfunction in our boards. And we've seen it in many of our board failures. It's where issues related to independence and ethics are not addressed that we get dysfunctional boards, or where we get issues where fraud and decisions that are not in the best interest of the company come in.
Yeah. Eva, you talked earlier about this, and I maybe just want to dig deeper a little bit into that, about wearing different hats and coming with different frameworks. Do you think that helps you? Does it help your lens? Like, or some people have a dominant lens, whether it's, I'm a union rep or whatever. Does that help me be more objective and see things differently, or does that actually hamper my, or increase my internal conflict?
So I think when we speak about different lenses, you would, for example, get a board member. You have sometimes boards where they would say you need to have legal expertise, you need to be a financial person, or depending on the entity, an engineer and so forth. So you basically come with your expertise. I go to every board that I'm in because I'm a lawyer. I will go there with a legal lens, right? But I believe that, in my opinion, for myself, the legal training that I have is something that also assists me to assist the entities on which I serve. Because the legalities I know, the common law I know that whatever entity I'm serving would be a juristic person. And then comes the broader issues of governance, where you talk about ethics, accountability, stakeholder relations, and so it goes. So I believe that the lenses can be conflicting at times, but it's about how you manage them for the best interest of the organization, obviously. And if you look at King 4, it talks about the integrated approach as well. So it's looking at the business holistically, looking at where you're serving holistically and taking all those things into account, and having a more systematic approach to decision making. So I think when you have different expertise on a board, it really actually enables, and it's an advantage. Yeah.
Thank you. Did you want to add?
I can add that the reason why diversity is so important on a board is that it deals with the issue of groupthink that I mentioned before, where we all look at things with a finance lens, or everyone on the board is a lawyer. You'd probably not have any decisions made because we would be questioning each other on this law and that law. So diversity is quite important in terms of bringing those different lenses, because in terms of oversight, it helps us see better. Excuse the pun, but we really need those different lenses to exercise the oversight function of the board effectively.
Yeah. Okay, no, sounds good. So we talked about this earlier, but let's go into it. I mean, when we opened and we talked about reading the room. So something that maybe is not always talked about blatantly is the conversation that happens before the meeting before the meeting, whether it's the phone call, the WhatsApp, the lunch, or whatever. What when the decision has already been made before the meeting happens? What does that do to governance? How common is that? And is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I would say it's not necessarily a bad thing. There are times where I would, for instance, not understand a financial matter on a board, and I would engage the person who is the accountant or the auditor on that matter before the board. The challenge is where the 2 or 3 of us take a decision already based on what we are discussing. Questioning, seeking for clarity, that's allowed. It is a pre-board discussion, but that's all good. But when those engagements result in a predetermined outcome of a board discussion, that's where it becomes dysfunctional. And that's where issues of ethics come in. Sitting in a meeting, WhatsApping each other about decisions and which way to vote, that's unethical. It happens in some meetings. And I think Evelyn mentioned the example of where somebody walks out of a meeting upset and does not even have tea afterwards because they did not expect that outcome because they were pre-discussions. That's where it really makes the board dysfunctional. Pre-discussions, I believe, are a good thing when it is used judiciously and where it is used to aid in better decision making. But when it tries to persuade another to take a decision in a certain way, then definitely it speaks to a lack of ethics.
No, I agree. I think it's how you do it, and also I think so there will be times when you might want to speak to the accounting person, but for example, if you're a chairperson and you do not sit necessarily on the subcommittees because of the nature of the entity that you serve. I think for me, what makes it a bit easier is that if you do have the engagements with the board members, then you kind of like try to have it with all of them. If you're 5, you call Etla, maybe you sit on the ARC subcommittee. I see there were issues about finance and I want to find out. So if you do it in an open, transparent manner, then nobody feels isolated to have that, because it's also about perceptions. You sit at the board and you're 5, and then you can get a feel that 3 people have met and had a discussion. So it's about perceptions of what it is that you're doing. So I agree that it's not a bad thing. It's definitely not a bad thing when you're using it for clarity in order for you then to be able to make an informed decision at a later stage. But if it's for influence or to lobby for a certain decision, then definitely, I think then that would be definitely unethical.
So the key here is to make sure that whatever pre-meetings happen is for the purpose of improving discussions, not to make decisions, not to influence decisions, not to decide before the actual meeting. And so again, it comes back to whatever we're doing should be for the best interest of the organization. All right, this is great. I love it. Do we have any comments online? I know some audience members, some phenomenal audience members are listening from the comfort of their electric blankets, they said. So are there any comments online or any thoughts, No? Yes, I can't see. Okay. All right. So let's talk about the other thing, silence. Silence in the boardroom. I think it's a dangerous thing. A director who knows something is wrong but does not say it. I think that's a governance failure. Some people attend every board meeting and they say nothing with signed resolutions. What makes directors go quiet? And who is responsible for breaking that silence?
Edla, I would say that's where the role of the chairperson is important. The chairperson should be observant enough throughout the meeting to pick up that Edla did not say a word in this meeting, and specifically ask Edla, that, Edla, what's your view about this matter? So that that silent voice speaks up. And what I have picked up is where people remain silent is where a dissenting voice is not respected or is not defended. Because the groupthink is so strong that if you have a different view, it's frowned upon. That's where people become silent. But being a director and equally so being a company secretary is about courage. You need to have hair on your teeth. And you need to speak up in terms of, but the decision we are taking can be challenged based on XYZ. And if you have information that will better aid the board in taking a decision, it's better to speak up. And directorship is really, as I indicated in the beginning with that quote, it's where people's lives are shaped.
Yeah.
You cannot accept a board position and come and sit there and go out without having said a word. Mm-hmm. That means you're not worth that seat.
Yeah.
When you get that seat at the table, you better add value to the table. You better bring your perspective because you've been appointed on that board because you have a specific skill or expertise.
Yeah.
So bring that to the room. Mm-hmm. Bring a different perspective. Ask important questions. If you come in and there's a decision that's been taken and you have a different view, ask whether we've considered something else. And you really pick it up both from a company secretary's perspective and also sitting there as a chair. And King gave an example once in a training that he gave that sometimes when he is the chair, he would, during a discussion, out of the blue, ask a director after agreement has been reached, why do you agree? And he says some directors were quite embarrassed because they did not even know what they agreed to because they were not focused, they were silent, and when they were asked the question, they had no clue about where they were. So it's really important to bring your whole self to the board when you're sitting there taking decisions that make a difference in people's lives and in the country.
Yeah, that's so good. Thank you. Eva, do you want to add something?
Yeah, totally agree. But I think it's also the issue of if you become a new director, and that's where I've seen the silence in a room. Someone gets appointed, and maybe it's shortly after induction. And so they're unfamiliar with the business, unfamiliar with the rest of the board members in the room. So there's a little bit of this thing of let me withdraw, let me first listen. But as Libertha said, when you sit in that boardroom, you need to make decisions. So attendance is not participation. You need to participate. So there is no stupid question. Management is also there to assist the board members to understand the business. So yes, the chair has got a very important role, but I would also just want to add that maybe as the chair and the company secretary are picking up those dynamics, we also pick it up for the training aspect. Because sometimes it's also the issue of confidence. Because we come with different personalities and we just want to keep quiet. Others are dominating the boardroom. Sometimes it's English. Others speak more eloquently than, so you kind of like go back into your little cocoon. So we have to pick up those type of issues and then put it up for the training as well for the board members.
There's something else that I also pick up when we have these board engagements is when people have maybe been put there, by a shareholder or by a representative to say, go do this for us. And so they are also scared to speak up because it's like, no, but we put you there for a reason. How do we navigate that? What do we do? How do we help people like that? I mean, yes, they understand that they're there for a reason, but there are those fears. What do we do? And yeah.
In terms of good corporate governance and the King principles, common law, the director owes their first duty to the company. It does not matter who you were appointed by or whether you were elected to represent a certain group of people, be it the union or be it the regulator. You are there to act in the best interest of the company, and you owe your allegiance to the company. And I've heard many times directors speak in the boardroom about we. But our view is this, and that means that that director is coming with a constituency view, or is speaking on behalf of 3 or 4 other directors. And when it comes to board accountability, it is a group issue. But when it comes to liability, we should never forget it's individual. So when decisions are challenged, when issues become court matters, you will stand there as an individual and you will be held responsible as an individual. So we definitely need to make sure that whatever decisions we take is in the interest of the organization, and that the allegiance is to the company and not to a shareholder. The first conversation I attended on this forum was with Honorable Shimi at the time when he was Minister of Finance. And I used the words that companies need to be protected from their shareholders at times and from their owners. And that is why we have issues like fiduciary duties. It is to make sure that there is no external influence, be it through a shareholder or be it through the owner of the business, on the interest of that company.
So Eva, I wanted to maybe ask you, just as an add-on to these comments. You often sit from the other side of the board, and what are some of the things that you observe, in terms of dynamics that these directors don't see about themselves?
Yeah, so I think if you're a director, you wait for the 360 evaluation, and then you get your report. And then you get, a report that says how you fare in terms of corporate governance and also maybe in terms of your behavior at times. But sitting there as a governance advisor to the board, you see a different perspective. You see how prepared they are for meetings. You see how decisions are made. Is it collectively made, or is it somebody dominating constantly? You see how management recommendations and submissions are analyzed. Are they really being analyzed for clarity, or is it just, it's financials, it's annual financial statements, the auditors have come to present, we are done. It's fine, you don't need to present anything. So from that perspective, as managers, you also ask yourself, well, maybe you over-prepare when you go to a board meeting, anticipating certain questions from your board members, and then they don't come. So it's a little bit, it gives you an indication of not really the seriousness, but the time and effort that the board members would actually take to prepare for the meeting, and how much time they've spent to also look at data, additional reports, whether they have asked you for any additional reports in order for them to make the decision. So there's a lot that you can actually, looking from that angle, see. And then it's also the issue of consistency. I think Libertha spoke to it, to say that as a company secretary, obviously, you're constantly in the board meeting, so you'd know historically how decisions were made. But as board members, the decision of 10 years ago is your decision as a board, right? So there needs to be consistency as well in terms of the decisions that are taken. So as a manager sitting there, you'd also see, okay, but maybe we're not consistent in terms of the application of some of the resolutions. Last year we said this, and this year we say that.
Okay.
So how does that, look to management?
Yeah. No, I'm glad you said that last part, because I wanted you to unpack it a little bit more in terms of what do you mean by consistency? Because I'm thinking from the lens of, the organization evolves or the environment evolves. So when you say consistency, what do you mean? Because perhaps the decision was good at the time, but now it's different. But I think you're referring to something else when you're saying consistency. Maybe just unpack that a bit more.
I think some of the decisions you take, for example, if it's a HR-related matter, there's a precedent that is created within the institution. So today we cannot say, okay, fine, with this MD, we are going to fire. But maybe 5 years ago, we said, no, let's just give this person a warning. So I'm talking about those type of decisions. The other decisions, obviously, that a board of directors would make would be dependent sometimes on the environment, the situation. Things change, like you said, laws change. But there are others where there's principled decisions that have been taken, and you just can't overrule it because of who the individual is behind the resolution that you must take. So I think it's those type of things that management would also look at when you check a board resolution.
No, that sounds good. Yeah. So I want to talk about performance, control, and the hard questions. And so Libertha, the King reports talk about effective control. King 5 now talks about prudent control. But what happens when the dysfunction is at the board level? The conflict, the power play, the difference is not in management, but in the governing body. Who oversees the overseer?
Edla, there is no governance power higher than the board. As much as they're appointed by a shareholder or an owner, the board needs to self-govern. A lot of times, governance seems to be focused on rules, regulations, policies. But we shouldn't forget that it's a group of people coming together. And a policy is only as good as the people that need to implement it. So the overseer needs to, through the chair is basically there for a reason. When there's issues of dysfunction in a board, where there is a director that speaks over others, that's dominating, it is the chair's role to make sure that that is addressed. And it is the chair's role to make sure that the chair is almost like, I want to call it a head girl, head boy. So that chairperson needs to make sure that we toe the line when it comes to values, when it comes to ethics. Mm-hmm. And there are stakeholders that hold directors to account. There's the regulators, there are courts. Mm-hmm. There's, when it comes to issues of environment that Eva has mentioned, there are NGOs that are watching what companies are doing, mm-hmm. And that will blow the whistle on certain things. So really, I must say that there is no authority above the authority of the board. Mm-hmm. That's why it's important for the board to self-govern through the chairperson and through other directors holding one another to account. And the other thing, Edla, is boards appoint company secretaries for a reason. And I have seen many company secretaries see things go wrong and keep quiet. And as a governance enabler, the company secretary aids the board in governing and self-regulating. So it's important to make sure that when you sit in the company secretary's role, that you have some grit, you have some courage to make sure that your board oversees itself.
Sure. I want to go on so many tangents on that whole thing, but I'm worried about our time because I'm thinking super director, chairperson, because there's that danger in there, but also in terms of, the company secretary, reporting, functionally to the CEO, and then that dynamic. But I mean, you said about grit. So let me pause. If we have time, I might come back to that. But Eva, Libertha talked a little bit about that earlier, in terms of just the weight of what, directors carry because of, the impact of their decisions. I mean, you chair 2 pension funds, those boards are governing other people's retirement savings, people who will never sit in that room and are trusting that you're doing your job well. How does that fiduciary weight change in how you show up?
Yeah, I think the common law responsibility is the same. But I
need to go look up a common law now. You said it so many times.
But I think in terms of it, the practicalities of it is more real. When you sit on a pension fund, you basically are looking at, like you say, somebody else has taken a decision as to how their pension fund benefits will be distributed upon their death if they have passed. So the one that I sit on, actually, most of the cases that we've dealt with is actually distribution of benefits for someone who has gone. And it's very personal because now you're dealing with a human factor. You have a surviving spouse, you have surviving children, and you need to have to decide how you're going to distribute, what this person has saved over their lifetime for the benefit of their loved ones. When we're looking at investment decisions, we also have to look at sustainability. What investment vehicles are we investing this money in? so that we don't lose the funds, but at the same time, just looking at long-term sustainability. So the fiduciary responsibility for me feels more real and alive, because the decisions you make, you can actually immediately see the impact. And you need to think broader than just the laws on pensions and the distribution, because the impact of your decision will be real for that child who needs school fees to be paid. So is that money going to be paid into a trust fund, or are you going to give it to the mom? So you look at more factors in terms of making those decisions. So you need to be prepared. You need to read that pack. You need to interrogate that pack. You need to ask the questions. You need to be independent, because you definitely differ in terms of distribution. And you need to have humility. The human factor as a director also comes in, because now you need to think of these different beneficiaries from the different societies that they come from and the different needs that they have. So it's a very interesting chairing pension funds, but I think it brings me back to that human element.
Okay. Is there something you wanted to add to that, or?
Yeah, definitely. I can't agree more. It's about the human element, and it's making sure that in bringing that human element, that those people that are affected by the decisions we make as directors, that their interest as a stakeholder also comes into the room, and their voice is also heard. So as much as the decision you take should be in the interest of the company, there are different interests that must be weighed up, and those voices need to come in as well.
So it is a tricky dance.
Balancing act.
Yeah, balancing act for sure. So maybe let us go into that whole the dominant voice thing, no? Because we talked about that, and I didn't want to go in it, especially because we're talking about the role of the chairperson, and and where the chairperson is kind of a choir conductor. I'm thinking, but we not to the point where they kind of become like a super director. But let's talk about the dominant voice. Sometimes the chairperson, sometimes the longer serving director, sometimes it's the person who controls the information. How does a board that generally wants to govern well manage that dynamic without losing the benefit of strong leadership? Because we want people to speak up, but we also don't want people dominating.
Yeah, and we spoke earlier about the board is human beings coming together to take decisions, and people come with different personalities. You get people that are outspoken, you get others that are reserved, and you get people that are timid. And that is where the conductor's expertise comes in as the chairperson, to make sure that every voice is heard. And directors in preparing for meetings need to really look critically at the information that is shared with them.
Right.
And as much as there may be a dominant voice, it is the chairperson's role to make sure that you sometimes silence that voice by saying, Ms. Zimba-Naris, we've heard you. I will now give an opportunity to someone else to speak. So it's a balancing act between respect, but also being firm in making sure that every single voice is heard. And board meetings are about consensus. But in reaching that consensus, there's sometimes disagreement. There's sometimes tough and heated conversations. And that is where the chairperson comes in to make sure that you balance and give every person on that board an opportunity to be heard. And I said it before, I'll repeat it again. If you come to a board meeting and you are timid and you are quiet, then you don't deserve to be on that board. Because you get the documents to interrogate it. Yeah. You get the documents to make sure that risks are looked at. You need to make sure that stakeholder views are considered. So even just asking a question about what does the regulator say about this? Have we considered the law about it? Just ask questions. And it is through asking questions that we get to consensus.
Yeah, is there something you wanted to add, or?
No, I think, she's answered it perfectly.
Yeah. Okay. So you have both served across public, private and SOE boards. Is the dynamic in the boardroom fundamentally different depending on the type of institution you are governing, or are the human dynamics essentially the same, whether it's public or private?
I think they're the same because
people are people.
People are people. People are people. So obviously the entities that you represent will have different mandates. The duties are the same, but in people you will find, the dominance, the gender issues, because sometimes you find that depending on the cultural issues, you'll find that maybe there's a woman who's grown up very differently that will decide it's only males in this board. I'm going to be quiet. Let them do the speaking. So those dynamics come out, and it's really about managing that as a chairperson, managing that collectively. And I think as board members as well, it's also the issue of we have to make decisions together. So how do we norm and form as a board? Because the norming and forming, there will be then that clash and the conflict, but then you need to respect the difference in opinion. But even with the difference in opinion, how do we collectively take the final decision in the best interest of the organization? So the human factors will be there. The trust issues will be there. Some people will be more courageous. Some people will speak without data. And then you have to come and say, oh no, but look at this. In terms of this report, this is the entity that we represent and so forth. So it's really just about reinforcing the fact that we're all accountable and the decision making that we make is collective. So if you have a dissent, we respect that. We can put it in the minutes, and it's no hard feelings. It's not personal, but collectively, let's make the decisions in the best interest of the organization, looking at all the factors, and just managing that relationship at the end of the day.
It's really good. We're almost coming to a close. Are there questions? Okay, apparently there are some people online. But before you read that, I think about the next question. I just want if you could change something about how boards in Namibia actually function. What would you do? But let's pause on that and hear from our online.
Right. We have a question from Joshua Malio. And he just emphasized that sometimes director silence is caused by either bullying or unfairness from the chairperson. He also added that it is important for director to be guided into decision making, because most importantly, sometimes they do not get relevant data, or they rather do not also prepare for the meeting. Therefore, the quality of the decision that they are making is not sufficient or up to standard. Therefore, it's up to the company secretary to then step in, or the chairperson, to ensure that they are guided to make the right and quality decision.
Thank you.
Moving on to the last comment is from Fanny Nikevali. He said, please...
My electric blanket.
Please address the issue of outside individuals that are not part of the board, but they are always trying to influence and shape the decision that the board is making. And it is not a governance, is this not a governance issue? And does it increase and erode of fiduciary duty, as the decision might not be in the best interest of the organization?
Right. Thank you. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you for always supporting us. And thank you, Phenomenal Fanny, for your question. I think Libertha will take that.
Yeah. With regard to Fanny's question, we have spoken about it when we discussed the issue of independence and ethics, and that outside influence has no place in the boardroom. Even your appointing authority cannot influence the decisions you take in the boardroom, and that should really not have a space in the boardroom. So definitely that is an ethical issue where the director needs to make sure that the coming into the boardroom discussing matters is not influenced by external forces, be it political, be it appointing authority, be it stakeholders. The director needs to make sure they exercise their independent judgment.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really, really good. So maybe let's talk to what we said. If there's one thing that you could change, not in terms of policy or structures, in terms of the human in the board, what would that be?
For me, Edla, it would really be making the boards a safe space. I think one comment that was made is where there's issues of bullying, where the chairperson does not protect directors who have a dissenting voice, and people's reputations have been impacted by serving on boards. People's names have been dragged through the mud because they spoke up in boards. And if we could change that culture of me questioning, me raising issues, does not make me the enemy, but it makes sure that we do governance right. If we can get that right, I think we're on the right trajectory, and more people would want to serve, particularly on the public boards, because they would know that whatever they say, the questions they ask, that it would be a safe space and they would be protected.
Good, thank you. Eva, what would you change?
Yeah, I think for me it's transparency as well. And in terms of just making ethical decision, I think Libertha spoke to it earlier. So we obviously know that when you sit there, you've got the individual collective responsibility and the accountability as well. But you find sometimes that people serve and they keep this, they wouldn't complete the conflict of interest declarations, or they'll just, have a different interpretation of what that conflict is, and, instead of what it should be and what it is. So I think being transparent, but I also tie in transparency, but it's also important to embrace constructive challenges in the boardroom so that we do create those safe places. Because at the end of the day, it's the reputation of the board members, the reputation of the entity at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ladies. Wow, this was really productive and meaty conversation, meaty information. And so I think what I'm hearing is that when you are appointed on a board, you need to know that you are there for your skill, for what you bring, and that you really need to show up. If you're taking up the seat, then make use of the seat. Don't be just a token. But we're also hearing that it's really, really important, the role of the chairperson, which is a great segue because on the 22nd of July, we are having a chairperson's masterclass with Prof. Tuli Madonsela and Patrick Chisanga. We are so, so excited. So please be a nice COSEC and nominate your chairperson. Because this is going to be really exciting because chairpersons really are the conductor of, good governance. They're not super directors, but their role is so important. So those two things. And we, again, just want to thank 91 for making this possible. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you, ladies, for showing up fully. You see, you lived the example of we showing up fully. We are participating and not just sitting looking pretty with our nice glasses, all of us. So again, thank you very much. Thank you for those who commented online, and thank you for those of you who tuned in. It's been a pleasure. Have a good night.